Hi, boys and girls. It's time for Sunday School Charlie, part 1, 2, 3, 4. Elsie, why are you wearing the Sunday School Charlie pin? I'm supposed to be wearing the Sunday School Charlie pin. Yes, I am. Boys and girls, tell her I'm supposed to be wearing the Sunday school pin. Really? I didn't know that. There's going to be a cow in our story later on, so that's why Elsie's wearing the Sunday school pin. So we'll just let her wear it today. Okay, are you ready for our story today? Let's see if you remember. Red, Preston, Charlie. Very good. 3 really good friends, and they're all in 5th grade. And do you remember the name of their school? You don't remember? They went to Oak Street School. Now, they went to the school when it was after school, when all the lights were off and all the kids went home, and Red went to his locker. Do you remember what he was looking for? Can you remember? Remember, they were trying to study for their spelling test because they wanted to do such a good job to show Mrs. Johnson what good students they were, but they forgot their spelling book. Red forgot his, Preston forgot his, Charlie forgot his. So they came up with a story that they would go back to school and they would go to Red's locker and they would get, he's got a silly locker, they would get Red's spelling book, and they did that. But it was kind of creepy being in the school at night, and they looked down the hallway. Do you remember what they saw? They saw a shadow of a person, and they didn't know who it was. But it was just Mr. Adams. And Mr. Adams helped take care of the school and clean the school and take care of the boys and girls. And it was just Mr. Adams, and he's a really nice guy, so they knew they were okay. Well, Charlie, Red, and Preston were going past the principal's office. They were walking past, and do you remember? They heard a real loud thud inside his office, and they looked under the door, and there weren't any lights on, so they knew nobody was in there, but there was a loud noise, and they kind of got scared, and I think I would too. And they ran and ran and ran and ran as fast as they could. And they went home and they kind of giggled. And they studied so hard for their spelling test. They studied all their words and they wrote their words. And the next morning, when they went back to school, they were so ready for their test. They knew that they had studied hard and they had prayed hard. And they were going to get a 100 on their spelling test. Well, just about time for Mrs. Johnson to start the spelling test, there was a knock on her classroom door. And the door opened, and in walked Mr. Davis. Now, Mr. Davis was the principal of the whole school. He was in charge of the whole school, and he helped the teachers, and he helped the boys and girls. And he went over to Mrs. Johnson's desk, and he whispered something in her ear. And he looked at Charlie, Red, and Preston, and Mrs. Johnson looked at Red and Preston and Charlie, and Mr. Davis said, "Boy, you need to come to my office." Did you ever have to go to the principal's office? They were so scared, and they went to the principal's office, and they were just shaken. They could not imagine what they did. Why would they be in trouble? What happened now? Well, Mr. Davis started to talk to him, and he said, "Boys, were you in the school building last night?" "Yes, sir." "Boys, somebody broke into my office last night and stole a lot of money." "Sir, it wasn't us. It wasn't us." And they just froze up. They couldn't even think. Like Charlie said, was thinking to himself, I remember something, but I can't think. I'm so scared. And Mr. Davis said, "Well, Mr. Adams, the custodian, he said that he saw you guys in the building last night, and you were running away from my office." But sir, we didn't take any money." Well, Mr. Davis said, Mr. Adams said, he saw something under your arm. "That was Red's spelling book. We just came to get our spelling book. Oh, Mr. Davis, we didn't take any money. Honest, we were just running." And Charlie was thinking, the last time they were running, they got in trouble, didn't they? They were running. Remember, they bumped into their teacher and they knocked all her shoe boxes all over the place. Maybe they shouldn't run anymore. Well, Mr. Davis said, "Boys, you were seen in the building. And you're usually good boys. You've been in our school for a long time and you never get in any trouble. But starting tomorrow, you 3 boys are going to have to stay after school every day for 2 hours. You're on detention. I'm going to call your parents and let them know what happened. So tomorrow after school, you be ready to stay after school." Charlie, Red, and Preston were so upset. And Charlie knew there was something he was forgetting and he just could not remember. And they walked back to the room and they thought, what are we going to do now? Everybody in our room's going to think we're thieves. They're going to think we're bad. And we tried to tell people about Jesus, and what are they going to think about us now? And they walked back to their classroom so slowly. And they opened the door to the classroom, and everybody got really quiet, and they just stared at them. And Charlie, Red, and Preston felt about that big. They sat down in their chairs. They couldn't even think of their spelling words. They were so shook up. What were they going to do now? Well, when Charlie got home that night, he knew he had to talk to his daddy because Mr. Davis was going to call his daddy. And he said, "Daddy, I got to tell you everything that happened." And he told him about forgetting the spelling book and going back to school after it was closed and getting their spelling book. He told him about Mr. Davis coming to the room today, and someone had broken into the office and they thought it was Red, Preston, and Charlie. He told Dad everything. And he said, "Daddy, everything's going wrong for me this year. It's just everything's going wrong. I don't know what to do, Daddy. I'm just so upset." And Charlie's dad said, "Well, anytime you're upset, it's really, really a good idea to think of a Bible story. Let's finish a little bit more of Joseph. Let's go sit on the couch and we'll talk a little bit about Joseph." Now, remember yesterday in our story of Joseph, Joseph is where? Joseph is in prison. Yes, he is in prison. Did he do anything wrong? No, he did not. He didn't do anything wrong. and he was still in prison. But God was still with him. The Bible tells us God was with Joseph everywhere he went. Now, in prison, there were two men who were in prison with him. Do you remember who they were? Do you remember from yesterday? One was a butler. And remember, a butler is someone who serves the food. See the little tray on his hand? And one was a baker. The baker's the one who makes all the food, makes all the bread, and makes everything like that. And do you remember they had dreams? Dream is like when you go to bed and you think of something. Miss Kathy had a really weird dream last night, but they had some really weird dreams too. Remember, the butler, he had a dream about grapevines. And there were how many? Do you remember how many grapevines there were? There were 1, 2, 3 grapevines. And in his dream, the butler took those grapes and he squeezed them into his boss's cup. Do you remember who he worked for? Do you remember who the butler worked for? Do you remember what his name was? Do you remember who that is? Pharaoh. Pharaoh. He worked for Pharaoh. And he squeezed those grapes into the cup and he gave the cup to Pharaoh. That was his dream. And Joseph said, well, that's a really good dream, Mr. Butler, because what that means is 1, 2, 3 days, you're going to get your job back. And when you get your job back, could you please tell Pharaoh about me? Oh, sure. I won't forget. I won't forget. Well, the baker was real excited, and he wanted to tell Joseph his dream too. And remember, on the baker's head, he dreamt there were 1, 2, 3 baskets. That's right. And what was in the top basket? Do you remember? Were there elephants? Kangaroos? There was bread. All kind of bread and rolls and stuff. And the birds flew in and they were eating all the bread. Well, Joseph got really sad for the baker because he said, you are not going to get your job back. In fact, in 3 days, you're not going to be living anymore. Well, it happened just like Joseph said, because Joseph depended on God to tell him what those dreams meant. And the butler did get his job back. But he didn't remember Joseph. He didn't remember him for weeks and weeks and months and months and years, until one day when he was bringing something to Pharaoh, his boss. Pharaoh looked very, very, very sad. And the butler asked him, what's wrong? Why do you look so sad? And Pharaoh said, I had a weird dream last night, and I don't know what it means. I asked all my wise men, and they don't know either. Ah! The butler remembered. He remembered Joseph. He said, oh, Mr. Pharaoh, I know somebody who can help you with your dreams. I know somebody. I met him in jail, and I forgot, but he knows God, the true God, and he can help you with your dreams. Well, Pharaoh said, go get him. And so they went to jail, the prison, and they got Joseph, and they got him all cleaned up. And Joseph got to stand before Pharaoh, the king of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh said, Joseph, I had a dream, and I don't know what it means. And the butler said, you can tell me. And Joseph said, oh, sir, not me, but my God can tell you. Because Joseph always loved to honor God. Tell me your dreams, and I will ask my God. Now, these are really cool dreams. So Pharaoh said, are you ready? So Pharaoh said, well, when I was sleeping, I dreamt I was standing by the river. There's a big river in Egypt called the Nile River. I dreamt I was near the river and something came up out of the river. Now, what could come out of a river? Could be an alligator, could be a hippopotamus, could be a really big fish. But what came out of the water in Pharaoh's dream were some cows. And they were big cows. He dreamt that out of the Nile River came 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 big, fat cows. Now I know why Elsie was wearing the Sunday school pin. Well, Joseph, that wasn't the end of my dream, because then out of the river came some skinny cows, itty-bitty skinny cows. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 really skinny cows. And Joseph, you won't believe it, but the skinny cows ate up all the fat cows, and they were still really skinny. What a silly dream. Well, then, Joseph, I had another part of my dream, and that dream was about, do you know what this is? Did you ever eat that? That's called corn. I love corn on the cob. Put some butter on it and some salt. Nom, 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 nom. It's so good. Well, Pharaoh dreamt of some corn. He said, Joseph, in my dream, there was a big corn stalk. That's what corn grows on. If you live where I live, we can go by some fields and we see big corn stalks in the fall. And the corn grows on there. And that's what Pharaoh dreamt about. And he said, I dreamt there were some ears, big, fat, huge ears of corn on the corn stalk. Will you count them with me this time? Let's see how many there are. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 again. 7 big, huge stalks of corn. But then, Joseph, I dreamt again, and I dreamt of another stalk of corn. Oh, look how skinny those corn cobs are. I don't think I'd want to eat those. They look kind of nasty. You all look pretty smart to me. How many skinny corn cobs do you think are on there? How many do you think? Let's see if you're right. Ready to count? Count out loud. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 again. So there were 7 big stalks of corn, and there were 7 itty-bitty stalks of corn. Joseph, what does my dream mean? Well, Joseph prayed to God, and God showed Joseph what the dream meant. He said, Pharaoh, in the land of Egypt, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just like there were 7 cows, and just like there were 7 ears of corn, there's going to be 7 years where everything grows really good. You're going to have lots of stuff to eat, and everything's going to be fantastic. But then there's going to be 7 years where there's a, try to sound it out with me. Ready? Ready? Famine. 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 Do you see the sad face I drew? A famine is a time where food doesn't grow very well and there isn't very much to eat. It's kind of like going to Walmart and there not being any food there. So Joseph said, Mr. Pharaoh, what you have to do is for 7 years, when everything's growing really good, you have to get someone really smart in charge and have them gather up as much food as they can gather up and save that food for the 7 years when there isn't any food. That way all your people will have something to eat. Well, Pharaoh thought that was a fantastic idea. And he looked around to all the people around him and he said, who could we find any wiser, are you ready for this, than Joseph? This might just work out for Joseph, just like we said. So Pharaoh took Joseph from the prison, and the Bible says he put him in charge of all of Egypt. Can you imagine a little slave boy that was thrown into a pit is going to be in charge of all of Egypt? And Pharaoh gave him some gifts. Let's see if you can find the gifts. I'll read. You look for them. I'll put the picture real close. And it said, and Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand. Let's see if we can find the ring. Can you find it? It's really teeny. Okay, so he has a ring. And arrayed him in vestures of fine linen. That's just a fancy way of saying he gave him all new clothes. Look how nice and fancy his clothes are. He doesn't look like jail clothes anymore, does it? And put a gold chain about his neck. Do you see the chain with a big jewel on the bottom? Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. Now, I think Joseph could have gone back to his place where he would live now and sing, and I know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Charlie, I know it seems like everything's going wrong, but when you go to school, I want you to think of Joseph. God started working things out for Joseph. Joseph had to be patient, and Joseph had to trust God even when he didn't understand, Charlie. And that's what you have to do too. You have to just trust God. Well, Charlie went to bed that night knowing he had to stay after school. And he tucked in and he went to bed, and it was just bothering him. There was something he was forgetting. And he thought and he thought and he thought and he thought. And then he got it. He remembered. He remembered what he forgot. And you come back tomorrow night and we will talk about what Charlie forgot. You guys have been such good listeners tonight. So before you get all tucked in and go to bed, can we practice our verse 1 or 2 times? How are you doing on it? Are you learning it pretty good? Do you remember the sign? Good. 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 Let's sing it, okay? Ready? And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Boys and girls, I love you. Be good and we'll see you tomorrow night.